This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Coming up, Holocaust Remembrance Day is marked around the world.
It is a moral obligation to talk about it because there are fewer and fewer people who can say, I was there.
In the U.S., President Joe Biden gears up for a difficult stop in his re-election campaign.
If you were to tell me that my vote would be the vote whether Biden wins in Michigan or not, I will still not vote for Biden.
And after explicit deep-fake images of Taylor Swift went viral, the pressure is on for the tech industry and governments to stop it from happening to anyone.
Taylor Swift moves the needle on just about everything, so hopefully she'll do that with this.
That's later, but first. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. It honors the 6 million Jews who were systematically killed by the Nazis before and during the Second World War. The date corresponds with the 1945 liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp. That is sound from a gathering of Holocaust survivors and their families at Auschwitz. In Canada, there have also been ceremonies all weekend, including one yesterday in Ottawa. In Germany, the day is complex and tied to the country's post-war pledge of never again. But as Rebecca Calder reports from Berlin, not everyone agrees on the meaning of that pledge.
In a square in northeast Berlin, a few hundred people gather to remember the darkest chapter in this country's history, the Holocaust, and the millions of Jews and other persecuted minorities killed by the Nazi regime.
It's Remembrance Day that as Germans we have a special guilt and responsibility, I think. And
Beate Ger and her husband Jürgen say it is particularly important this year as the far right gains popularity here. Millions of Germans have taken to the streets across the country in recent weeks after a report that members of the Alternative for Germany party were at a meeting to discuss plans to deport foreigners and German citizens of foreign origin, reminding many of early Nazi policies.
It do not start with the big crimes. It starts with the small things, yes?
Some here wear vests that say grandmothers against the right, and others hold signs that say never again is now. Never again was the post-war German pledge to ensure the crimes of the Holocaust would never be repeated. But the lesson Germany should draw from its history is being interpreted differently by others here.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
In central Berlin this afternoon, two groups of protesters shouted "Shame on you" at each other across a 4-lane road closed off by German police. One group holds Israeli flags, the other Palestinian. Both groups hold signs that say, never again is now.
Lang lebe Israel!
Hannah Welcher shouts long live Israel in German with a group of other protesters.
for me as a German, that's a really special meaning. Never again means now, means never again the Holocaust, never again anti-Semitism, and to do anything to save Jewish lives.
She says since Hamas's October 7th attack, it is more important than ever to side with Israel.
Stop the genocide!
But across the street, protesters chant for a ceasefire and criticize German weapon sales to Israel and unwavering political support for the country, including Germany's pledge to intervene in the genocide case against Israel in The Hague. They say the lesson Germany needs to take from its history is different. Zina, who didn't want to give her last name, also holds a sign that says, "Never again is now."
What do you think Germany's lesson should be from its history?
Not to support a genocide. Doesn't matter if in Germany or somewhere else in the world. It's like, didn't you learn from the history, from the past, from what happened? People are dying.
They all do seem to agree Germany's history means a special responsibility for the country. But there's a great divide here on what that responsibility should mean. Rebecca Collard for CBC News, Berlin.
Police in Fredericton are investigating after a synagogue was vandalized in the city's downtown area. Several windows were smashed sometime between Friday night and Saturday morning. Police say they are investigating whether the incident is the result of targeted hostility. Ivan Levine is the former president of the synagogue.
It's a very sad day in Fredericton, to think that our
fathers and forefathers have contributed so much to this city, and this is what a few bad apples have done.
A vigil is being planned for tomorrow to show support for Fredericton's Jewish community. The head of the UN aid agency UNRWA is urging countries to reconsider suspending its funding. It was founded to help Palestinian refugees. Now a growing list of countries, including Canada, say they will stop financially supporting it after some of its staff were accused of being involved in the October 7th attacks on Israel. It's not yet clear what this will mean for people in Gaza. As Cameron McIntosh reports, there are worries an already dire humanitarian situation could get worse.
Trying to flee the fighting, displaced Palestinian civilians scramble to carry whatever they can in the streets of the South Gaza city of Khan Yunis. Some have been homeless and wandering for months. I don't know, it's death whether here or there. Is there danger here, says this woman. These are the civilians UNRWA, a UN aid agency for Palestinian refugees, is supposed to be helping, but now finds some of its staff accused by Israel of aiding Hamas on October 7th. Canada, one of several countries to suspend financial support amid appeals from Palestinian officials. Nabil Abu Rudina is spokesman for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
This decision is incorrect and should be stopped immediately. We urge all these countries to repay the UNRWA because it's a humanitarian issue.
UNRWA says several of its employees have been fired as the UN investigates the accusations. But without funding, spokesman Stefan Dujarric warns the suffering of Palestinian civilians will only increase.
There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza who rely on UNRWA's humanitarian work, who rely on humanitarian assistance, even more now than they did before.
White House spokesman John Kirby calls the accusations troubling.
We expect that will be a complete and thorough and transparent investigation. We all want to see that.
Israel, insisting it's acting in self-defense, is denouncing the UN. Its ambassador to the UN repeating Israel's long-held stance that UNRWA collaborates with terrorism. It comes at the same time as the UN's top court, the International Court of Justice, warned Israel against committing acts of genocide, but stopped short of calling for a stop to the war, disappointing many Gazans who were looking to the court to put international pressure on Israel for a ceasefire. In Khan Yunis, Israel continues to target what it calls Hamas infrastructure, which has included hospitals further crippling Gaza's healthcare system amid ever-increasing civilian casualties. Former Israeli cabinet minister Yossi Bilan doesn't see a near end.
To stop the war today means to keep Hamas in power in Gaza, and this is something that we cannot accept.
While the U.S. says it's optimistic a ceasefire can still be negotiated, the fighting isn't letting up as the diplomatic strain deepens. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Donald Trump continues his march to the Republican nomination despite his legal challenges. The courtroom drama hasn't fazed the former U.S. president's supporters, setting up another contest between Trump and President Joe Biden. As freelance reporter Steve Futterman tells us, Biden is facing some serious challenges of his own.
We have all heard the comments from voters here in the U.S. They do not want Biden versus Trump Part 2. This was Nikki Haley on Tuesday night.
Most Americans do not want a rematch between Biden and Trump. The first party to retire its 80-year-old candidate is going to be the party that wins this election.
Barring a sudden change, however, that's exactly what the voters are going to be facing in November. But both men, although they do appear fairly certain to win nomination, face potentially troubling signs. The issues facing Donald Trump are pretty well known. Mostly it's him.
This woman, I don't know her. I never met her. I have no idea who she is.
This is Trump talking about E. Jean Carroll. Yesterday, she won an $83.3 million judgment against Trump for defamation. Before he dropped out of the GOP race, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said an election with Trump will end up being a race about the 2020 election and his legal challenges.
If it's about, Donald Trump, I don't think that puts Republicans in a good position to win.
And polls have shown a significant percentage of Americans, including Republicans, will simply not vote for Trump. Not quite as much in the forefront are the hurdles Joe Biden faces among the Democratic base. Sure, there is the issue of age. But a looming problem is brewing among a sometimes overlooked minority group, Arab Americans. Alabas Farat is a Democrat, a member of the Michigan State Legislature from Dearborn, which has one of the highest percentages of Arab Americans in the U.S.
If Biden wants to reopen the door to the Muslim community, it's very simple. It begins with a ceasefire.
Many Arab Americans, especially those of Palestinian descent, are furious with what they see as Biden's refusal to confront Israel as the civilian death toll in Gaza rises. In 2020, Adam Abu Salah voted and even campaigned for Biden. Not this year.
If you were to tell me that my vote would be the vote whether Biden wins in Michigan or not, I will still not vote for Biden.
Michigan is a key battleground state. In 2020, 146,000 Muslim Americans voted in Michigan, mostly voting for Biden. What they do in November could determine the winner. Yes, it may be Biden versus Trump, but both face discord inside their parties. Steve Futterman for CBC News, Washington.
Taylor Swift is the latest high-profile victim of a growing problem: AI-generated, deepfake pornography. The technology is becoming more sophisticated, more accessible, and easier to use, and laws haven't kept up, leaving ordinary people at risk. But after millions of people viewed fake, sexually explicit images of Taylor Swift online, tech experts are now hoping her star power and her loyal fan base will force lawmakers into action. Philip Lishanok reports.
Explicit deepfake images of Taylor Swift went viral this week, with one post getting more than 45 million views on X, formerly Twitter, before it was removed. Vowing revenge, Swift fans have posted images of a 27-year-old Toronto man they claim is responsible. In a statement, Toronto police say they are not involved in any investigation, as no victim has come forward.
Lately I've been dressing for revenge.
The issue came up in a White House briefing this week. Spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre says social media companies need to police their own content
to prevent the spread of misinformation and non-consensual intimate imagery of real people.
X has been called out in the past for its failure to quickly address sexually explicit deepfakes that pop up on the site. Today, searching Swift's name on the platform came back with an error message. The company also announced a new Trust and Safety Center of Excellence to be located in Austin, Texas, where 100 full-time moderators will enforce its content and safety rules. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella says there is industry consensus.
Irrespective of what you're standing on, on any particular issue is, I think we'll all benefit when the online world is a safe world.
Yes, it's happened to Taylor Swift, which is horrifying, but it's actually happening behind the scenes at high schools around the country.
Tech author Laurie Siegel says some states have legislation, but she hopes the pop singer and her fans will champion a federal law.
Taylor Swift moves the needle on just about everything, so hopefully she'll do that with this.
But experts say the case has shown how advanced and easily accessible AI-generated deepfakes have become, and how far behind laws are. Ben Coleman is co-founder of Reality Defender, which develops deepfake detection software.
The problem is that government regulations just don't exist yet. Things are moving way too quickly, and the requirement should be on the platforms to flag deepfakes, not on the consumer.
And he says the potential for deepfakes causing damage goes beyond celebrity pornography. It's an election year not just in the U.S., but voters in democracies around the world will soon be going to the polls, and the abuse of this technology could potentially create chaos. Philip Lishanok, CBC News, Toronto.
For decades, it was the only unsolved homicide in Prince Edward Island. Now the long ordeal for the family and friends of Byron Carr is finally over. The PEI man was murdered in 1988. Now Charlottetown police say a man has been charged. Wayne Thibodeau tells us how it was done.
We only wish we could have given these answers sooner.
Charlottetown Police Chief Brad McConnell gets emotional as he talks about the time it took to find Byron Carr's alleged killer. This week, a 56-year-old man was charged for the crime.
It's been a long 35 years.
It was an emotional day for the more than 20 members of Byron Carr's family who packed into police headquarters, some wiping away tears to learn about the arrest. John Carr, Byron Carr's brother, thanked police for sticking with the investigation.
And it's like a weight being lifted off you. It's hard to describe. It's just kind of a release.
Carr says the search for his brother's killer weighed heavily on his parents, who died in recent years. John Carr says he wishes his parents were alive to hear this news.
It was always foremost on their mind. And the police did visit them on a number of occasions, and they were grateful for that.
Carr was killed in 1988. Police have long said they believe Carr had consensual sex with a young man he brought home and presumed that person was his killer. A message written on the wall of the crime scene read, "I will kill again."
There's still much work to be done, but we hope this arrest will give you some of the peace of mind you've longed for.
I'm Dave Stewart. I'm a member of the queer community here on PEI.
Police say their investigation was stymied by a reluctance of people to come forward. Back in 1988, when the murder happened, many in the island's LGBTQ community didn't want to talk to authorities because of a fear of being outed or a distrust of police.
So, I mean, he was a teacher, and at that time, there were still people trying to fire gay teachers simply because they were gay.
McConnell was asked if Carr's murder was a hate crime. He says police have not ruled that out.
We had DNA from the crime scene.
Police say advances in DNA technology and genetic genealogy was the breakthrough they needed. Investigators found underwear in Carr's home the night he was killed, underwear they believe belonged to the killer.
We believed if we could find a match to that DNA, we could find the person responsible.
Todd Joseph Gallant is charged with first-degree murder and interfering with human remains. Police say after the murder, Gallant lived in Arkansas and Texas, where he has a criminal record. He returned to PEI in 2022. McConnell says they are working with law enforcement in those states. Police say they won't release any more details now because the case is before the courts. Gallant is scheduled to appear in provincial court in Charlottetown February 1st. Wayne Thibodeau, CBC News, Charlottetown.
The world's largest cruise ship is set to begin its first voyage today from the port of Miami. Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas is nearly 365 meters long and cost over $2.6 billion Canadian dollars to build. It's also the first ship from the cruise operator to be powered by liquefied natural gas. That brought criticism from environmental groups because LNG can produce more methane emissions than traditional fuels. Brian Comer is with the International Council on Clean Transportation.
Using LNG is one way to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that their ships are emitting. But when you actually look at the implications for the climate, it's actually a step in the wrong direction.
Royal Caribbean says the ship is 24% more energy efficient than the global requirement set by the International Maritime Organization. Meanwhile, the days appear numbered for gas-powered vehicles in this country. The federal government hopes that by 2035, all new cars, trucks, and SUVs sold in Canada will be electric, and it's introduced measures to see that happen. One country that is already ahead on this is Norway, which is well on its way to phasing out the internal combustion engine. I spoke to CBC climate reporter Ben Schingler about how they did it. So, Ben, I understand about 1/4 of the cars on the road in Norway are electric and that it's aiming to phase out the sale of gas-powered cars by 2025. That's a full decade sooner than Canada. How's it doing that? How's it pulling this off?
Yeah, so it may seem unlikely that EVs are a big success in Norway, given that it's a major oil exporter. But Norway is also making this a big priority domestically, and it has put in place a lot of incentives, starting more than a decade ago. The government has high taxes and fees on new gas and diesel vehicles, and those fees are waived for EVs, so that's a big incentive. It also exempts EV owners from paying tolls and allows them to use bus lanes so they can avoid traffic.
And then can you remind us, how does that compare with Canada?
Yeah, so there's a lot of differences. The plan announced by Canada last month was more focused on getting car companies to sell EVs, not as much about incentives to get consumers to buy one. But there are already rebates offered by the federal government and some provinces to encourage consumers to buy EVs. But these rebates, they don't come close to what Norway has in terms of incentives. Christina Bu, she's with the Norway EV Association. She told me a lot of what they did, though, could work here.
Norway, as Canada, is not the easiest way to start an electrification. There's large distances and a small population and cold climate. So the fact that we've managed this fast transition is only because of policies.
And then let's get into some of the challenges. And one of them that, people might think of is charging stations. With all of these EVs, are there enough charging stations?
Yeah, that has been an issue, but it's getting better from what I've heard from everyone that I talked to there. There are nearly 8,000 fast charging stations across Norway. So that's about 100 cars per fast charger. A lot of charging stations have been installed at, for instance, gas stations. And in some of the new gas stations, there's some gas pumps as well, but the priority is charging stations. And then in rural areas, the government has invested more money to extend the network because that's where businesses are more reluctant to do so. Daniel Breton is the head of Electric Mobility Canada. He says Norway's approach to charging stations could be replicated here.
We should put as much emphasis as we can on making sure that as many Canadians as possible will install chargers at home or in charging hubs or in multi-unit residential building, and therefore having less of a need to install public chargers.
Okay, but with all these chargers everywhere, how would that affect the electrical grid?
Yeah, so Norway does have the advantage of having a really strong grid already in place. That's because the country relies almost entirely on hydroelectric power to heat its homes. But the demand from EVs in Norway only amounts to about 1% of the total demand on the grid. And the government estimates that even if all vehicles were electric, the demand would still only be about 10% of the total demand on the grid. The big issue, though, when people are charging, they tend to charge at the same time, often when they're coming home after work. One expert I spoke with about this said that there are policy solutions to that type of problem, like charging higher electricity rates during those peak hours.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so all of these changes have already been put in place. How have they already affected Norway? And then what's still to come?
Yeah, so these policies have been really successful. So successful, actually, they've started removing some of them. For example, the rules that allowed EVs in bus lanes, they've scaled those back because they were creating congestion in their own right. Some critics say the government should put more of an emphasis on public transit or cycling because the policy for EVs hasn't really addressed the issue of congestion in big cities. But from an emissions perspective, the policy has been a win. Emissions from road traffic is down about 15% from the peak, which was in 2015. And a government official told me the next priority is to encourage commercial vehicles to go electric.
Okay, Ben, really interesting to see how another country is tackling this. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
That was the CBC's Ben Shingler in Montreal. You're listening to The World This Weekend. For now, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Starting Monday, we'll have a new name, Your World Tonight, but with the same mission, to bring you the best of CBC journalism. You'll be able to hear Your World Tonight every evening, 7 days a week on CBC Radio, and find a new podcast version online, wherever you get your podcasts. That's the moment India's Rohan Bopanna and Australia's Matthew Ebden won the men's doubles at the Australian Open. Bopanna's victory is being held up as proof that success can come at any time. It's his first Grand Slam title in his 17th appearance at the tournament. And at 43 years old, he is now the oldest male player to win a Grand Slam in the Open era. Bopanna will be ranked world number 1 in men's doubles for the first time when rankings are updated next week, with Ebden at number 2. And we will wrap up all the highlights from the Australian Open tomorrow. Well, the Kim family from Toronto is setting up shop in London. You know who we're talking about. Kim's Convenience, the play turned CBC TV series, is returning to the stage in its UK debut, and it's already charming British audiences and critics alike. As Lauren Sproul tells us, it's on track for a record-breaking run.
The Burgundy foyer of London's Park Theatre is abuzz as theatregoers prepare to take in a matinee of Kim's Convenience.
This afternoon's performance of Kim's Convenience in Part 200 is about to begin once again.
22-year-old Canadian Lucia Kang is one of them.
I feel like the Canadian part of me is calling.
Kang says as a fan of the CBC TV series, she wanted to see the award-winning play it's based on.
So I'm just hoping for it to take a fuller picture of the story and like the inspirations.
Kim's Convenience is on its way to becoming the Park Theatre's most commercially successful play in its 11-year history.
It's such a delight as a piece of theater.
Few are more pleased about this production's triumph than producer and proud Montrealer Adam Blanchet, who shepherded it across the pond.
I felt that the play would actually make a real impact and be exactly what London audiences in the UK would need.
Written by Korean-Canadian playwright Ins Choi, who also stars in this production, Kim's Convenience centers on a day in the life of store owner Appa, Korean for father, and the comings and goings of his family members.
Very good, from Korea.
Director Esther Jun played Janet in the original 2011 production.
The container of Kim's Convenience, because it is at a convenience store in Toronto and it's with a Korean family, that part feels very Canadian, but I think the appeal to it, again, is how universal that is.
Jun says the response in London to the entirely East Asian cast reminds her of how audiences reacted when Kim's Convenience was first staged at the Toronto Fringe Festival.
I always think of London, UK as ahead of the theater game, and it didn't really ever strike me that perhaps when it comes to East Asian representation, that they were actually a little bit behind. And I really sort of hope that Kim's in London is just a giant step forward for representation on those stages, as it was here in Canada.
For actor Brian Law, starring in the play helped him reconnect with his Canadian roots. But after living abroad for more than a decade, he needed a little help with his accent.
In the show, I do say sorry. I've changed that recently. Trying to make it more sorry and more American and stuff. And even some other British things I've kind of slipped in.
That authentic Canadianness is also reflected in the set dressing, which is full of Canadian convenience store staples like Coffee Crisp, O. Henry, and ketchup chips, which Lucia Kang says made her both homesick and hungry.
It made me very nostalgic, and I really wanted to ask if I can eat the set after they ended.
Just one of the many details that make this production of Kim's Convenience a feast for the eyes and the heart. Lauren Sproul, CBC News, London.
I loved you in the morning, our kisses deep and warm, your hair upon the pillow.
There's another Korean-Canadian success story to celebrate this week. Writer and director Celine Song has been given Oscars nods for her hit film Past Lives for Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay. It's a huge achievement for Song, whose family moved from South Korea to Markham, Ontario when she was 12. Past Lives is loosely based on her own life, and it's been incredibly well received since its debut at the Sundance Film Festival last year. Here's how Song described the balance between her approach to making the film and its reception to Q's Tom Power at the time.
And I think a part of the making of the movie is always like you try not to think about how people are going to receive it. All you can really do is try to make a movie that feels like true to you and then right to you and that you like, that you love. And then you hope that once it's done, then you start worrying like, okay, yeah, but then now other people are going to enjoy this? Like, I care about this movie, but are they going to care about it as well?
Now, many say Song has been snubbed by the Oscars for not getting a Best Director nomination. But she says she is thrilled with the nods her first film did get, and surely they won't be the last. Now here's a little more of one of the songs from the Past Lives soundtrack by another great Canadian. It's Leonard Cohen with Hey, That's No Way to Say Goodbye. But we think it's actually a pretty good way to say goodbye for tonight from the world this weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thanks for listening.
loved you in the morning, our kisses